A few quick housekeeping matters. We are really hoping to have some conversation with this group today. So we won't be changing the screen sharing at all. You are welcome to change your view by going to the upper right-hand corner, and you can select if it's easier for you to focus just on the speaker view or however you prefer to see your screen. We leave that to you to adjust to your preference. We will be offering continuing education credits for social workers, marriage and family therapists, and counselors. At the very end, Natalie will give us the details about next steps if you do want continuing education credit. This does not have continuing legal education credits. We did not apply for CLEs for lawyers, so just FYI on that. I am really thrilled to welcome our partners for this presentation and want to introduce Erika Anthony from Cleveland Votes and Shammas Malik with ThirdSpace Action Lab, and my colleague Catherine Donnelly, who will be our key presenters today. And I invite each of them to share a little bit more about their background and introduction when we get to each of their sessions. But thank you all very much for your time and expertise and being with us this morning. Other colleagues from Legal Aid are with us and volunteers. Welcome. Please chime in. Natalie Ziegler for getting us all organized and making sure this goes smoothly. So thank you for all of your work as well. I am now going to walk through a few slides to help set the stage for today's conversation. I introduced the group. Here's the agenda. I'm gonna do a brief introduction, like I said, kind of set the stage for our conversation. I'm gonna turn it over to Shammas, who's gonna talk about community and stakeholders. We will take a break, we promise. We'll give you a chance to stand up, stretch around 10 o'clock, and then come back for a conversation with Catherine about the legal tools and lawyers' role in social change efforts. One more break then at 11, and we will wrap up with Erika talking to us about the role of money and funding as that relates to social change. And then Natalie will conclude with the logistics that we all need to pay attention to. Please, part of this introduction is going to be a quick intro review about legal aid, and then we are going to get into the substance. So just for anybody who's not familiar, Legal Aid is a nonprofit legal services organization focused on civil legal matters. We provide free services to clients and communities who have low incomes in a variety of areas. And just want to make sure folks are aware, there's a lot of different ways to reach out to Legal Aid if you're interested in information or assistance. So those are shown here. Applications for service can be made online now. If you haven't seen that, that's something we implemented over the pandemic stage. So go to our website, look for the Apply for Free Legal Help button, and you can do an online application. The other recent feature that we added to that tool that folks have given us really positive feedback about is you can schedule the callback. So start the application online, provide initial information, pick a time that's convenient for you to follow up with an intake specialist for the rest of the eligibility interview. And that can be scheduled right there online when you do that initial application. We also have the tenant info line and worker info line, which are great options for folks who just need to understand their rights, get a question answered, aren't necessarily looking for representation at this point, but want to get a little bit more context for a situation or a problem or a question. So again, civil legal services include a wide range of types of issues. Some of them are pretty familiar. Others are things not everybody really thinks about going to a lawyer for. So education might be a good example of that. Problems with a school district, advocacy for a student with disabilities, students who may not be in permanent housing, who need help staying in their home school while they're in between housing, and then everything else you see here, problems related to money, housing, benefits, employment issues, family issues, some immigration work. And so really anything kind of in these buckets is worth at least a follow-up to see, could legal aid help me in this area? Our eligibility requires that we serve people in our 5-county service area. So that includes Ashtabula, Lake, Geauga, Cuyahoga, and Lorain counties. We serve clients whose household income is at or below 200% of the federal poverty guidelines. We do have a duty to check to make sure there's no conflict of interest. So occasionally we have to decline to serve somebody if we've already represented somebody in that same matter or a related matter. That does not come up terribly frequently. And then the last question here is really to capture the idea that we unfortunately do not have the resources to meet the entire need facing low-income Ohioans in our county. And so we have to make hard choices about where to put our resources. And what we try to do is we try to make those priorities by evaluating how significant is the risk? What's the nature of the issue? How much is the problem impacting a person or a family or a household on the one hand? And then also, are we the right people to help solve it? Is it a legal problem? Is there a legal solution that if we were involved, we could bring some real benefit to that situation? So we are attempting to use our resources most effectively by going through an analysis that really prioritizes those aspects of cases. But today, the focus is really on another aspect of legal aid's work. We have expanded over the last couple of years our community economic development work and group representation. And this is something we've been really trying to spread the word about, and appreciate you all being here today. And hopefully you'll pass the message on that legal aid is also involved in representing community groups and nonprofits who need to use legal tools to reach their goals and achieve their objectives. So examples of the kind of legal assistance we might provide are things like entity formation, tax issues, help with contracts. We've done some policy analysis for different groups, compliance issues, negotiations, and sometimes it's litigation. So there's a wide range of ways that we are trying to offer support for residents who are working together in an effort to achieve social change. Even when we are representing groups, we still have to follow our requirements for funding. And so we have to serve those who cannot otherwise afford to hire a lawyer and who are either made up of primarily people that have low income and would be individually eligible for our services, or where the group is focused on an issue of poverty. There is a brochure on our website that you can look to for more details about group representation, and that's this legal aid for groups and organizations. So before we dive in, just want to acknowledge that this work is very personal for some of us. It certainly has the potential today to bring up experiences that we or people we care about have had to live through. I hope everybody will take care of themselves, participate as much as you feel comfortable, step away if you need to, but just be mindful that this is our work, but it is also our lives. And so we want to acknowledge that can be complicated and sometimes stressful. We also really appreciate anybody who's comfortable and willing to share your experiences in this work. Again, that's sometimes our most impactful learning is through our experience and others that are comfortable and willing to share. But please be mindful that you're respecting people's privacy and confidentiality, that you're sharing what is yours to share and letting others share anything that is their information. So in order to try to tie all of this discussion together, we are actually going to use a hypothetical. It's a bit meaty. We have a lot of details in there. So what we're going to do now is post a link in the chat and give you all a minute to look at that hypothetical. And then I'm going to just highlight a few different aspects of it briefly before we dive in. So I think Natalie is going to share the link.
Yes, I just shared the link.
Awesome, thank you. It should open a Google Doc. If folks are having any trouble opening that and reading that document, please come off mute and let us know. I could share it if we need to do that. All right, so feel free to just leave that open. You may find it helpful to return to it. Some of the aspects of this hypothetical that will come up and we will talk about in our substantive sections today. I'm just going to quickly highlight and then we'll move on. So the part one, focusing on community. Aspects of this hypothetical that we urge you to start thinking about and that Shammas will talk about in more detail is who is the community? Who are we talking about when we talk about that word of community? And then following from that, who are the stakeholders and the decision makers? Who has power in this scenario? How is that power distributed? Is it different depending on what aspects of the situation we are maybe considering? And then what's the focus? Is this really a scenario that focuses on individual residents and issues they're facing? Or is this a bigger picture neighborhood problem, community systems type situation? And is it even fair to ask that as an either or question? In the second part of our conversation, we're going to focus on the law and the lawyers. So what are the legal tools that might be relevant to this scenario? Is a lawyer even needed to help in this context? What meetings are open to the public? What records might residents want access to? How might a community benefits agreement be helpful or relevant in a situation like this? And as an example of how government entities could be relevant, the Board of Zoning Appeals is often a player in community economic development. What do we need to know about that entity? And finally, the funding. Where is the money coming from anyway? How can residents get access to this funding? What money goes to the nonprofit organizations? What about the government entities that are involved? And what might the role be for philanthropy in something like this? So we have a lot to talk about, and this was really just to set the stage. If there's any quick clarifying questions, I'm happy to take those now. Please feel free to use the chat or to come off mute. We will be allowing time for questions sort of at the end of each segment. So I know it can be a little bit awkward sometimes on a Zoom presentation to sort of jump in, but there will be a specific invitation for questions in addition to trying to keep up with anything you need to clarify as we talk. Anything currently? Right then, I am going to pass it to Shammas to get things started. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Anne. And hi, everyone. My name is Shammas Malik. I am a policy fellow with ThirdSpace Action Lab and really excited to be here with you today. First of all, thank you, Legal Aid. I've been a huge fan of Legal Aid Society since I was in law school. So it's really an honor to be part of this discussion along with the wonderful co-presenters. So I will try to go ahead and share my slides. We are heading into 2.5 years in COVID, and one of these days I will learn how to do this. So just a moment. So can everyone see that? Okay, great. So I'm going to talk for a little bit, hopefully not talking at you for too long. I really want this to be interactive and a discussion. So as we're talking, please feel free to put any thoughts or any comments in the chat, and we can make sure to hold those for the discussion. So as I mentioned, my name is Shammas. I'm with ThirdSpace Action Lab. I'm also an attorney, although I'm not here as an attorney today. And then also, I am in my day job a city council person down in Akron, Ohio, which some of you in Cleveland may have heard of before. I'm not here in my capacity as a council member, but obviously it's relevant to the idea of community and social change, so I wanted to mention it. So ThirdSpace. So we are what we call a grassroots solution studio, founded in 2018, and with the goal of prototyping creative place-based solutions to complex socioeconomic problems. So at its base, a lot of the work that we do is consulting, but we try to really be grounded in community and be grounded in the idea of placemaking and listening. And so ThirdSpace really comes out of the work that we've done around bringing REI training to Cleveland. That was something that our co-founders, Evelyn and Mordecai, when they worked at Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, they worked to bring REI. And then, as many of you who may have done Groundwater or Phase 1 have seen, one of the important things that people come out of that with is, okay, how do we apply this work to our organization? And this is our group. We have some great people on the team, people doing all kinds of different stuff. But these are the three things that we really work on, which is community collaboration, applying REI insights to organizations, and then space activation. So I want to go back for 1 second to, sorry, 1 second. Oh no. Sorry about this. I told you we were going to have Zoom issues. So we are headquartered in, 1 second. So we're headquartered in the Madison, which is a building at 1464 East 105th Street in Glenville. And so the Madison is a historic building because it was built to be a medical office space. And it was built by one of the earliest Black architects in Cleveland. And now Famicos, the CDC, owns it. And ThirdSpace is headquartered here. And really, this is part of the work that we're trying to do in community building. We have lots of groups that are in the space. We have a first floor space, and then we have one of the apartment residential units. And so yesterday there were students, high school students from John Hay who were there. This picture on the right is from a discussion about gun violence that happened last summer. And we're continuously trying to kind of bring the community into the work that we're doing and also be consciously listening to the community. And that's going to be an important part of the discussion today, obviously. And so what we really focus on is trying to work on systems change, right? All of the work that we do, all of us who are here on the Zoom screen, it's often based on working on the individual level on service delivery, but as much as possible, we want to be focused as an organization and as a community on how do we really create racially equitable systems change, whether that's looking at policies, processes, relationships, and more. And I think, again, that's going to be part of what we discuss here. How do we kind of, even as we're doing the day-to-day work that we're all doing, how do we try to spend some of our time focused on that systems change, and how does systems change work? So as Anne mentioned, we're really going to focus on community and reflecting on what community means and what it means to authentically and effectively engage in systems change with a community. So here's a brief agenda. I've already captured the background, and then we are going to go into a practice we call soul check. Some of you may have heard of, but you are all going to participate. And then we are going to talk about the groundwater analysis, the groundwater metaphor, and how that relates to racial equity and systems change. We're going to go to this wonderful hypothetical that you have the link to, and talk about, who is the community and who are the different stakeholders here. And then we're going to talk about this idea of liberated space. And this is a practice that, again, you may have heard of, but it's something that we really try to center in our conversations in ThirdSpace as a way of breaking down some of the barriers that we all bring to conversations, and really creating spaces and conversations in which people can engage, like I said, effectively and authentically, and helping use that as kind of a practice, exercising that muscle so that we can really kind of center the understanding of racial inequity and the urgency and the need for systems change. And then we're going to talk about that in practice, how we try to move it into practice as part of ThirdSpace, and also, how it's reflected in this hypothetical. We don't want this to be too abstract or too theoretical. We really want to, talk about what is actually possible. We don't just want to be kind of idealistic, but how can you actually bring this into practice in the work that each of us are doing? And then after all of that, several hours later, we will have discussion and Q&A. So hopefully we are headed towards that very quickly. But first, we want to do what we call soul check. And so this is a practice that we have at ThirdSpace, which is trying to start off meetings that we have by having everyone kind of reflect on a question that's kind of central to the conversation that we're going to be having, and then actually sharing your perspective. So the question that we have today is, we want everyone to be thinking, what is a community change effort that you've been a part of, in which you felt folks engaged authentically and productively, and what did that look like? What were some of the practices that people put in place to be able to do that? So if anyone would like to raise their hand and mention and just talk briefly about, community change that you've been a part of that's been really positive, or if you want to put anything in the chat, this is the time. So I'm going to shut up for a second and see if anyone would like to be brave and be helpful and share. All right, Rashida, can you unmute yourself? There we go.
So hi, everyone. I have been fortunate to be a part of a group through Healthy Neighborhoods. It's a City of Cleveland coalition. And what we do is to really look at really hard conversations like race and racism. And we bring race and racism into the conversation with art. So right now we're in the process of getting murals curated. We're having a Juneteenth celebration. And also we had an artist contest, and the contest was based off of Maya Angelou's and Paul Dunbar's We Wear the Mask poem. And even though we're starting all of this community conversation about it, I think the joy of it is this group being able to really talk, and this is a very diverse group, being able to talk about race and racism without it being so emotionally charged. And I think that's the reason why this group does so well having these conversations, because we have the opportunity to constantly have the conversation. So we're kind of not perfecting the conversation, but we feel very authentic. It doesn't feel scary. And I've been in other rooms where I'm a part of big public health community collaborations where we have to talk about things like racism, and it can be very uncomfortable. And I believe it's uncomfortable simply because people aren't used to talking about it, because they're afraid of what others' reactions may be about their own lived experience. So yeah, that has been super cool, and I think we're able to be more productive because we're able to be honest with ourselves and with others in the room.
Thank you so much, Rashida. I am the least artistic person on the Zoom call, but it's so interesting to see how art and culture and different forms of art can help people engage with conversations around this in a way that, like you said, is accessible and kind of cuts through how heavy these conversations, often are and often have to be. Who else would like to share something? Just you can raise your hand or put anything in the chat. Anyone else? Last call? Because after this, it's going to be me talking for like another 15, 20 minutes. So. Okay. Well, I appreciate, Rashida, you sharing that, and we will move forward. So I want to take a minute to kind of walk through the groundwater analysis and kind of how that grounds how we think about community and how we think about systems change at ThirdSpace. And again, some of you may be very familiar with the groundwater metaphor, but for those who aren't, we just want to make sure to kind of go back and refresh all of our perspectives. And so, oh no, there we go. 1 second. Can everyone see that? Okay, so as you may have seen this image depicted before, but when we think about race and racism and systemic racism, often we think about it at the fish level, right? There's racism that's individually affecting individuals. There's people who there's specific acts of targeted racism. And so, we have to help people who are dealing with the impacts of that, right? We have to help, with programs that lift people out of poverty, job training, education. We have to provide, these basic needs. And often this is the work that, a lot of service providers are doing. That's often the work of legal aid lawyers and others. But often this is not enough, right? Because one, it's often acting from a position of privilege or kind of acting upon people that we're trying to help or fix individual people, right? But we recognize that, people exist within a broader spectrum and a broader system, and that's the lake, right? That's the culture and the practices and the policies and the structures. That's our form of government here in Northeast Ohio. That's kind of the specific programs and policies that have developed over time. It's what services are available and what's not. Some communities have universal pre-K, some do not. And so we're all kind of working within that lake that, kind of the what's possible. But we want to take one step back further from that, right? And acknowledge that systemic racism and really all forms of oppression, based on any kind of bigotry or discrimination are really built into the structures that go back historically. And so, we have one of the most famous and well-known examples, right, is redlining. We can look at the redlining map of Akron or Cleveland, and we can see that the places that were redlined in the 1940s are exactly where we have poverty, we have poor health outcomes in 2022. And that recognition is really an understanding that, you know, we can't, the fish work that we are all doing and that we need to do is not going to be what ultimately fixes the groundwater, right? Because we have to reckon with that racial history and that legacy. And we also have to then in turn use that as a narrative and as a reason to change the existing structure and the lake that's there. And then when we fix the groundwater and fix the lake, we will hopefully have to do less in terms of the work of policies and programs of helping people in terms of fish. And really all of this is also about empowering everyone, right? Because when we acknowledge the history and reckon with that history, we recognize that we need to do what we can to empower everyone, to empower ourselves and to empower others to be in positions to really be liberated from this oppressive system. And so this is kind of going a little bit more into depth about it, but we recognize that racial inequity looks the same across systems, right? We talk about racial inequity in policing or in other issues, and it may be particularly tragic or direct or salient there, but there's racial inequity in finance, there's racial inequity in transportation, right? Socioeconomic difference is important, but it does not explain racial difference, right? When you control for socioeconomics, we still see this legacy of racism built into the system. There are systems that contribute significantly to those disparities they developed over time. And particularly important, I think, for this hypothetical is that we have poor outcomes are concentrated in specific geographic communities. And again, that's why I wanted to mention the redlining, and that this can't be explained by a few bad apples, right? Racism in 2022 is not about Bull Connor and the specific people who are doing specific bad things, who are committing hate crimes. Those are important, but they don't explain the system problem that we're dealing with. So this is our theory of change, right? We want to acknowledge that advancing things in the law and in policy is only half of the battle, right? What we have to do is we have to take action, but we also have to build awareness of the issue, right? And so this really is an acknowledgement that kind of law and policy advocacy and a lot of the work that we do, it has to be married with community engagement and awareness building and kind of a narrative understanding, a shared understanding that we're all building. And those two things reinforce each other, because, you know, we can change all the laws and policies in the world, but if people don't actually understand the need for that, then we are not going to, that can't be sustainable. At the same time, you know, if we increase awareness and we increase understanding of issues, but we don't change law and policies, then it just creates cynicism and frustration. And that's actually something, sadly, we're seeing with the gun control debate right now, right? There's, you know, huge majorities of people who understand what the problem is and understand the reasonable solutions, but we have this blockage that's preventing the policy change, and that's creating a lot of cynicism and a lot of frustration for many people. And so this is the same kind of point, which is the importance of these awareness building activities and kind of the REI actions, the action steps that we take. And these build on each other, and they're iterative. So, you know, we need to do both. So we have this hypothetical. So if you took a second to look at it, you can also pull it up now if you have a second. But we have this idea of this overpass, and the aging overpass has pushed traffic into the neighborhood. And so, this has created a lot of different issues, right? There's a lot of traffic issues. There's, probably people who have been hurt. It probably makes life harder for pedestrians and cyclists. Sorry, Anne, I'm adding more to your hypothetical. But it also creates opportunities for some of these small businesses that probably have not seen as much traffic and probably are struggling to hang on in the era of Amazon. But this is, something that's very familiar. This highway that's here, it came in and it tore a neighborhood apart, right? And we know from, we can infer that this is probably a Black neighborhood, right? It was probably a neighborhood of color. And, this is coming in from the suburbs and helping, here in Akron, we have the inner belt. The inner belt tore through a Black neighborhood, and it saved 90 seconds of time for people's commute. And it never was actually fully completed. And so right now we're actually decommissioning the inner belt and hopefully doing some of that reparative work. But again, that legacy that, probably this highway was built in a time that's within the lifetimes of the people who are still alive today. And so we have to recognize that's in the background. And then we have this multifamily building that has been run down, has an absentee landlord. Again, we can add to it that maybe the landlord is out of the state or out of the country. And we have, ideas about, is it going to be redeveloped? Who's going to decide whether it's redeveloped? Is there concern about gentrification? And so we have a local CDC that's convening elected officials, residents, and others in the nonprofit space to discuss this, right? And so this really asks us, who's the community? And as a lawyer, I will give you a lawyer answer, right? Which is that there's no specific answer, right? There's no easy answer for who the community is. But we have residents, we have the people who live in this neighborhood, and you can be as general and as specific as you want, right? You can focus on the people who live in this multifamily building, right? They should arguably have the most input about what happens here because they've lived here. This is their home. But there's also the people who live in the surrounding neighborhood who probably want to see some rejuvenation, some economic opportunity along these storefronts, right? You have the commuters who are passing through, and maybe they live close by, maybe they live half an hour away. And so to what extent are they interlopers, or are they part of the community? You have the small business owners who may live in the community, they may not, but they are probably part of the community. They're helping employ people. You have this absentee landlord, right? This landlord's probably not really part of the community, but has an awful lot of power and authority here because they have that equity that gives them, certain legal rights. You have the elected officials, right? And I don't want to speak ill of elected officials, but but it's also worth wondering, who do they represent, right? Is it a ward council person who really is focused on that specific neighborhood? Is it more of an at-large council person who's focused on the city as a whole, who might be worried about more than just this particular overpass in this particular building? Is it a county official who has to worry about, the transportation of people coming in from the suburbs and also folks who live in a large city? Or is it even broader? Is it representatives from, a senator or congressman's office who are worried about, how this implicates, federal HUD and how this implicates the Federal Department of Transportation? And then you have the CDC leadership, and I'm sure I know my co-presenters are going to get into this, but the CDCs have kind of grown up as kind of an ancillary power structure, an alternate power structure to city or county government in a lot of situations where they own land, they help provide programs and economic opportunities, but they also are not necessarily accountable to anyone. I mean, they're somewhat accountable to cities and counties. They're somewhat accountable to residents, but they have a lot of separate power. And then the same thing is true for nonprofits, right? We have a lot of great nonprofits in our area. It provides a lot of benefit. It allows us to punch above our weight economically, but at the same time, who are these nonprofits accountable to? And, you know, ultimately, is it to donors? Is it to large, you know, national funders? And so this really gets into the issue of, you know, what is community and how can lawyers and community stakeholders interact authentically and productively? And so I've gone on, but the point that I'm trying to underscore is that there are all these different power dynamics and all these different positions from which people come to a table. And so some people, you know, may not be able to come to this meeting that's being convened at all because they work busy schedules, they work 2 jobs. Some people may not be able to come to this meeting because they fear retaliation if they speak out. Some people, you know, might very easily be able to make this meeting. And so we're all coming to these situations, we're all coming to these areas from different perspectives and with different interests in mind. So how do we engage in a productive way? So this concept that I want to talk about today is a liberated space. And so it's an idea of how we can gather and how we can communicate and discuss as community. And so as it says here, there are 3 elements. There's the definitions, the values, there's this equal status contact, and there's inspiration. So the values are all about caring, commitment, compassion, and self-esteem. We're trying to put aside our narrow self-interests and try to really recognize and value community. And again, I'm going to talk about this later, but I want to recognize this is pretty idealistic, but it is a practice that we can all bring into conversations. We can all try to acknowledge the humanity in one another and acknowledge that someone who comes from a different position might have some reason why they're doing that, right? If I'm a tenant in this building and I'm worried about gentrification and being pushed out, you know, it may be difficult, but I can also try to step inside the shoes of that small business owner who sees an opportunity to build a little bit of opportunity and wealth for themselves and the community as well, and vice versa. Everyone should be able to step into other people's shoes, and this is the idea of equal status contact. We should engage equally. We should try to minimize the differences that come between us. And this is often the biggest issue with lawyers and clients, right? Lawyers are often operating from a place of tremendous privilege. Often there are racial dynamics, there are economic dynamics and wealth dynamics, and there's education dynamics often. And lawyers particularly have to be cognizant of these and have to engage in a place that's listening and that's seeing, really trying to understand where other people are coming from, particularly their clients. Now, at the same time, there also has to be a recognition that lawyers don't have like ultimate power, right? Often people think that lawyers have a magic wand that they can wave and solve an issue, right? And often the limits that exist on lawyers and on all kinds of actors are pretty significant, right? You know, I know that legal aid folks are often, you know, actually federally prohibited from engaging in lobbying and from engaging in some of the broader macro systems work that people probably often want to do. And then finally, the idea is inspiration, right? If you're really trying to free your mind when we're entering these spaces, it's going to help bring about a system in which we really have empathy and which, you know, creativity and solutions can flourish. And so I don't want to go through this too much more in depth, but I want to, you know, I think everyone is looking at this saying, this is a nice idea, Shammas, but when a building is going to be, you know, gentrified, when, you know, the community is coming to a meeting to learn about the tax incentives and the new space that's going to be developed and the community benefits, no one's coming to this with compassion and inspiration and all these things, right? It's often a very negative experience. It's often a very heavy conversation, to Rashida's point. And so is this possible? So I want to suggest that it is, right? And I want to suggest that we can all take steps to set that up. So when these situations are occurring, when some community meeting is happening, it's often very reactive. It's often because there's been some terrible tragedy or because there's some impending thing like a zoning change that is creating the sense of urgency. And so often people can't engage in a way that is kind of fully thought out and is fully engaging with other people, as engaging with their humanity, because we're just focused on, okay, are we going to get to the outcome that we want? Are we going to fight? Are we not going to fight? And so we have to create more spaces in which we are engaging with people, not from a sense of urgency. When we're engaged, wouldn't it be great if there was a community meeting that was happening on an ongoing basis before there was this discussion about developing this multifamily building, so that people could just get to know each other and get to understand each other as people? And then when that really tough issue happens, that person says, you know, I know that I can reach out to my council person and talk to them. I know that CDC leader has spent some time with me and understands some of the challenges, understands some of my goals and my dreams, and that we're all engaging with this equal status contact. Again, this is challenging, this is difficult, but I know it's the work that we need to do if we're really going to engage in systems change, if we're really going to engage in a way where we're building a shared understanding of the issues that we're dealing with. So this is something that we try to do at ThirdSpace through what we call intergenerational lunch. And so about once a month, we try to bring folks from our surrounding community in Glenville into our space and have lunch and sit and talk about the history of Glenville, but also just about current issues, about things that people are dealing with, about positive stuff, negative stuff, heavy stuff, light stuff. There's music, there's art, and we try to really just create space by which people can engage, like I said, with equal status contact and can really get to know one another. And again, there's no sense of urgency. There's no decision point that we are hurtling toward that's ratcheting up tension. But through this, we can build awareness, shared awareness, like I said, about kind of how we got here, about our history, about what specific issues happened in our neighborhood here in Glenville, and how that relates to the decisions that we're making in 2022 about Opportunity Parkway, which is almost like the Hypothetical, right? It's a huge investment that connects the highway to University Circle and to some of these East Side neighborhoods, right? So this is one way that we bring it into practice, but there are other ways. There are ways in which everyone at this table engages with community and engages with stakeholders. So I've been talking for a long time, as I said, but I would love to hear any questions that you have, any thoughts that this sparks in you. How do you engage with community? And what does this make you think of when it comes to systems change? Anyone should feel free you can either raise your hand or you can enter any thoughts or questions or anything in the chat.
I have a question. This is for Sheeta. I'm sorry, I didn't have my camera on. Sorry about that. I am thinking about intergenerational engagement in the community, and I think that's really hard to do. And I think all of the community agencies usually struggle with that. And I say this in a sense of working in public health for so long. It's usually really easy to get the regular people at the table. And these are people that usually have the time. They're usually very connected in the community. They're usually retired. But when I think about people who are younger. For example, in my role, I work in maternal and infant health primarily as my job, and I advocate for that a lot in the community too. It's really hard to get other folks at the table, and I would say primarily our youth and people under the age of 40. So when you do these intergenerational lunches, how are you engaging people like where they are? How are you making sure to get those voices to the table and let them know how important their voice is in this process, especially when we're talking about generational things like redlining and all of these things that impact, not just folks who are available, but the folks who are not available.
Absolutely. And so I think, first of all, it's just recognition that it is challenging, right? And that it is a tough issue. And often, when we're trying to do this work, it is the same folks, right? But I think that, first of all, when it comes to, particularly our elders, we want to do this in a way that's, respectful, but also that's, not that's not exploitative, right? We can't just continue asking people to give us the answers or tell us about their problems and engage in traumatic, heavy conversations. And so, we're not going to invite people into our space and try to pay them. That's going to be insulting to a lot of people. But we have a lunch and we say, hey, come and break bread with us, and we can sit at your knees and listen, right? When it comes to younger people, absolutely, I think that often has to be a lot more structured. And so, like I said, there's a connection to John Hay, and there were 25 young people in the space last night, and I'm mad that I missed it, because I would love to hear what young people are saying. And often we see those gatherings at times of tragedy, at vigils or other things like that. But we need to find better ways, particularly, of engaging with, all of those grassroots people, whether it's, sports coaches or, elders or people who can bring those young people to the table and do it in a way that is, meaningful. So we're not just saying like, hi kids, we're here to talk about redlining, but is really saying like, hey, like, talk to us about where you're at. What would you like to see for your neighborhood, for your community? So Michael asked, do we use agendas? So at ThirdSpace, we have agendas for everything. We have agendas for the agendas, right? Like there's too many agendas. So oftentimes we have a very detailed run of show actually for these intergenerational lunches. And we're very intentional about, like I said, about, making sure that it's over food, because that, again, like the art, is something that allows people to engage in a way that's a little less heavy and that's a little bit more easy. But I think that, one thing that we try to mix those things in, right? We try to balance those heavier conversations with some of the lighter stuff, and also recognize that, like, what are we engaging with people for, right? And so it's not fair to go to people who have an issue with, substandard housing conditions and ask them, what are the policy solutions to fix substandard housing conditions, right? We can ask people to share some about their experiences, but, it's actually not for, residents to have those answers. It's on the council members, and it's on, the experts at, Enterprise or Center for Community Solutions, right? And so everyone has their role, and we don't want to be engaging with people just for the sake of engaging with people. We want to be building authentic, real, meaningful relationships where people, and that's often why the focus on history and culture and stories are so important, right? Because those stories paint a picture of some of the systems change that's needed, right? When you hear during All-Star Weekend, people might have heard the story about the Ali Summit, but this was when Muhammad Ali came to Cleveland in, I think it was 1967. And he met with Jim Brown, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and a bunch of other people, and they tried to talk him out of boycotting the Vietnam War. And by the end of the meeting, they all stood behind him at this press conference, and it was this united front of young Black athletes. And what's so notable about this is that this happened right in University Circle, right? Just blocks from where we are at ThirdSpace. But that story isn't something that a lot of people necessarily know. And so we tried to like kind of have a lot of those conversations around All-Star Weekend and try to bring up some of those, uncover some of those histories and stories. The architect who actually created the Madison building, he came to the space last year, and he hadn't been there in decades. And he's standing there in the space that he created and kind of looking around, and it's this incredible moment. And so we really try to catalog those things and try to create space for those really human experiences and interactions that we can kind of see each other's humanity. So any other questions or comments before we turn it over?
Shammas, this is Anne. I think something that you've now prompted me to really think about that wasn't really at the front of my mind in all of these discussions is the importance of timelines. And so listening to the process you described, and yes, there's something idealistic about it, but also, super important. But it strikes me that it requires time. There just is no way to shortcut that relationship building, trust building, conversation, etc. And I'm wondering if you have examples or sort of what your thought might be about, how to ensure there is time for that when there's also funding deadlines and developer deadlines and other external time requirements. And is that a place that even potentially lawyers could help push back on for groups that want to get more time in their process?
Yeah, so time is the thing that we all want more of, right? Especially I think during COVID, we all recognize just how challenged we are in terms of time. And there's this saying that change moves at the speed of trust, right? And I think that's so true. And so I think that it's definitely on all of us the first thing is priorities, right? Like to the extent that it is within our control, we can be very thoughtful about our priorities and the things that we are giving time and space for. But I think it is the role, particularly of lawyers, but also for kind of policy leaders and policymakers, to not rush things and to not kind of artificially push time constraints. So, if a development is happening and the city and the developer have spent a year talking about it, and then they are going to release this to the public on January 1st, and there's going to be a vote in the council on March 1st. That's an artificial thing that they're deciding to do. And they could say, we're going to give this 6 months for the public to really spend time on it. And, some of the incentive structures don't always work that way, because the idea is that we don't want to give the public 6 months to potentially put together a coalition to oppose this, right? And we have to acknowledge that. But as much as possible, and that's why often I think as a lawyer, I think about process way more than outcomes, because if we can get people to commit to good process, then the outcomes will sort themselves out. But if we're willing to kind of tie our own hands when it might not favor us, in the long term, I think we all win, because we may not get everything we want out of a thing, but we are doing that iterative work of building trust over time. So again, very idealistic, probably too idealistic. But I think that, often if we're willing to sacrifice a little of our narrow interest in service of a process or in service of community, it can have benefits in the long run. So I think I'm at time, so I don't want to go on and on, but I do want to thank everyone for listening. I really appreciate sharing this today. And if anyone wants to reach out, ThirdSpace, we're available on our website. We have a monthly newsletter. We're on social media. So we have events all summer. We're going to be doing things for Juneteenth. So come by next weekend. But again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Shammas. Really appreciate that discussion and information. We are taking a 10-minute break at this point. We're going to stop recording, but we will be back and starting up again right at 10:15. So we will see you shortly.